So, with that, welcome to Why You Need a Talent Development Strategy for the Skills Economy, sponsored by Skillsoft today. We do have two presenters with us, Mark Onisk, who's the Chief Content Officer at Skillsoft, and Gretchen Ringer, Director of Learning and Development at Leidos. So, I'm going to hand them over to you, and we hope you enjoy your session today.
Great. Thank you so much, Mel. Thank you for the time today. So really appreciate everybody making time to join our session. So maybe just a little bit of just expectation setting as we head into the discussion. I know the title of the session was Why You Need a Talent Development Strategy in a Skills Economy. We're really going to spend a lot of time today really unpacking how to think about skills, strategy, and implementation. Some of the really basic kind of blocking and tackling, how to define skills, how to understand those, how to unpack taxonomies, how they impact all the different parts of the talent lifecycle. So we don't have slides. This is purely, we're going to share with you examples and case studies. With me is Gretchen Ringer, who is, as we said, Director of Learning Development at Leidos. And Gretchen has an immense amount of experience in implementing skills-based talent development lifecycle and skills-based strategies, in the real world. And so, has really a tremendous amount of knowledge and information here that we're going to share and unpack in really just a Q&A and interview style. Now, before we go ahead and jump into the discussion, I would like maybe just for those that are on the call, if you could just take a moment or two and just say, tell us a little bit, have you implemented or are you planning to implement some type of skills-based talent strategy? Meaning, have you started to define kind of the key job roles and skills across your enterprise? Are you working those into your talent life cycle? It would just be helpful for Gretchen and I just to index the discussion a bit, if you could. And while folks are doing that, Gretchen, maybe if I could just invite you to introduce yourself to the audience and maybe just give a little bit of background in your role at Leidos and some of the things you've worked on around skills and talent.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Happy to do that. Hi, everyone. I am Gretchen Ringer, and I get the pleasure of leading learning and development for Leidos. Leidos is an international organization. We have government customers, civil customers. You might recognize us if you've ever been to an airport and you've gone through security and you stand up to be scanned. Your arms might be like this, and that thing goes around you. Whoop, whoop. That has Leidos on it. That is one of our products. We're really in the business of people. And that's what I'm going to talk a bit about today when we really dive into skills in our talent processes and our strategies. I've been with Leidos for 16 years. I've been in several different roles. Leidos has been around since 1969. We used to be called SAIC. We had the unique opportunity in 2013 to spin off SAIC and really reimagine ourselves, and we became Leidos. The name Leidos comes from the word kaleidoscope. So if you spell that out and you go, how is it spelled? K-A, and then the L-E-I-D-O-S, and then scope afterwards for the scope part, that's Leidos. And we picked that because we really think about when we're solving problems for our customer, the most vexing, challenging problems that we're solving, we like to look at the problem from multiple angles. And if you think about a kaleidoscope, that's where that comes from. So that's just a little history about Leidos. We have about 47,000 employees. We're a global organization. So when we think about talent, we think about talent all around the world.
Great. Well, thanks for the background, Gretchen. I think it's really helpful. And I think it's helpful for folks to kind of get a little bit of background in some of the work that Leidos does and how you think about learning and development. So I'm just doing a quick pulse of some of the comments that have come back in the webinar chat. And it looks like people are kind of in the early stages of, thinking about skills academies and actually starting to do some planning for 2025. So with all that said, it seems like this discussion is really well timed. Again, we're very much focused on substance and the narrative, and we'll actually unpacking some detail in the session. So again, we're not going to get into a lot of slides here, but happy to follow up and unpack some of that. But as we kind of jump off into the discussion, Gretchen, I know you have a lot of experience in actually implementing kind of skill-based kind of talent lifecycle, and maybe just as a part of a level set of what we're talking about before we kind of jump into the substance of the discussion. skills is one of these kind of overused terms. You hear a lot about skills and like, skills this, skills that, the skills economy. When we talk about implementing kind of a true skills strategy or a skilling ecosystem inside of a talent lifecycle, what we're really talking about, for just common definitions here, is when you think about the different kind of components of work that actually exist in like talent and human resources, you have certainly workforce planning, you have recruiting and onboarding, you have performance, you have total rewards, you have learning, you have succession planning, you've got an entire kind of life cycle. Now, many of you that have worked in kind of the HR and talent space for a number of years will know and appreciate the fact that in many cases, those are kind of cottage industries or cottage sub-functions inside the HR and talent space. And they all attempt to do the same basic thing. They attempt to describe the skills and roles and capabilities of the workforce. And when you take a step back and you think about it, in just about every other facet of business through enterprise software, we've been able to manage just about every other component of the workflow and business process, everything from, inventory to logistics to capital asset management. You're able to really kind of quantify and understand things and measure, manage them at scale. The one exception to that is typically trying to manage your human resources and your talent resources. It's been very hard to historically leverage software to quantify and measure your human resources and your people in a very meaningful way. So typically what's happened is you have individual kind of descriptions and kind of fiefdoms that grow up inside of an HR and talent function. And so when you try to do things like workforce planning, you try to do total rewards, you try to actually then get that information to talk to performance and then actually plan out learning plans, those things become incredibly complex because they require human intelligence at every level to inspect the data and really kind of, fit the different parts of the processes together. Well, with the advent of generative AI and some of the new large language models and technologies we have, you're able to start standardizing a lot of that information at scale. So the hope is that these different disparate kind of talent and workforce function can start to speak together more elegantly. And you're starting to see organizations adopt new ways in which they think about posting job roles, pricing job roles, managing talent development, creating kind of career mobility options, which is actually improving the overall employee experience. And that's really what we're after here, is actually using skills to define and really help people understand their current capabilities, their career aspirations, helping organizations really understand, some of the cost structures and the things that they use and in terms of the capabilities of the folks that they're bringing on, and really just create a better working environment for the people. So with that as a level set, Gretchen, interested in your perspectives here. We hear a lot about skills today, but I'm just curious, like, what is a skill? How do you define a skill? And like, why do you believe it's so important in today's environment? I gave a little bit of context, but I'm interested in your view on this.
Sure, absolutely. And any of you can Google what's a skill, and you'll see the ability to do something well. When I think of a skill, and if you're asked what your skills are, it's typically 1 to 2 words. It's generally related to your performance. So if you think about the skills it takes to do the tasks that are part of your job, that's really how we think about skills. I think it's twofold why it's become important. Um, Hiring, from a hiring perspective, we've been focused on the expansion of the talent pool. So when you're able to look beyond education and experience only, and you can look at proficiency level of skill, you're able to expand the talent pool, which is incredibly important for us. As I mentioned, Leidos is a people company. So as we are providing services to our customers, it's the people. So we're looking for people with specific skills. It's that in combination with the ability, as Mark said, to really use skills as what I call the common connector of our talent processes. It's the one thing you can tag on to a person, you can tag on to a piece of content. If you've designed a course, what are the skills that are covered in the course? What are the skills that the employee have? And then you've made this common connection. And with AI, and we saw this 9 years ago in 2015, that's when we began our skills-based organization journey. And it was very early on then, but we started to see, skills as that common connector, and really where can we double down in our approach around skills.
Yeah, no, I think those are really great definitions. And I think the way that you explained it as the common connector across the different talent process. And another way is to kind of open up the funnel and the aperture so you can actually have models in which you can attract and just draw from a broader talent pool, especially in a technology-driven organization, I think is incredibly important. The one really interesting kind of intersection point here, and I will say that if people are kind of listening to this, you're probably reflecting and saying, well, don't we kind of have this in job descriptions today? And I'll say that job descriptions have a few different things. Number one, I often, part of my opening monologue, if I'm doing a stand-up comedy routine on this type of thing, which I don't get a chance to do, obviously, is that, number one, most people, when you ask them to look at their job description, the first thing they say, well, nothing I do is really in my job description. So that's like the first just irony of it. The other thing is, I actually think there's more job descriptions that have been written in humanity and in the world than there are actually people employed in the global workforce today. I just, how often do you run in, and I talk to organizations, companies all the time that have, like they have a couple 100,000 employees and they probably have 300,000 job descriptions. It just, these job descriptions seem to continue to multiply. And, the first thing you need to do when you will go to recruit or post position is write the job description. You're asked for, okay, what's the experience level? What's the education requirement? And from there, then you get to kind of roles and responsibilities and decision-making authority. And that's what Total Rewards usually uses to price the job description. But there really is kind of a new way of thinking about this. So, Gretchen, it'd be really helpful to kind of share your experiences and how a skill definition, role definition actually differs from a job description, and how should we actually think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you've ever written job descriptions, you'd be happy if the day comes when job descriptions are gone and we never have to look at job descriptions again. I think we could all be out there celebrating and dancing if you've been part of writing job descriptions. I really think that the difference, and there definitely is a difference, is really the responsibilities in the job description are specific tasks that you do to be successful in your job. Skills are the ability you have to successfully execute the tasks in the job description. So if you're more focused on, as maybe a hiring manager looking to hire it for skills based on, tell me about a time when you did X, Y, and Z in the specific job description, you could be asking about how you used project management as a skill and have more skill focused. Because if you've got the skill, then the actual tasks in the job description can change over time without having to have additional experience because you have the skill. So I believe they're very different.
Yeah. No, and I think that's a really good point. Especially when you get into trying to manifest, and put the kind of the lens on it around proficiency and actually then trying to reflect that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. But there is kind of one really interesting point, and I remember you kind of walking me through this, about a year ago, as you're kind of pivoting from this notion of job descriptions to roles. There's some real basic reasons why not everybody just jumps in and does this, right? And I think
Yeah.
one of those is, number one, you have to be cognizant of kind of the regulatory elements of it. You have to be, if you work in a union environment and you've negotiated job descriptions and profiles, those become very complex because you have to think about that. Just if you could maybe unpack for the audience, what are some of the basic kind of realities and actually pivoting from a world of job descriptions to roles? I mean, that would actually be, I think, a kind of an interesting kind of perspective here.
Yeah. So starting with skills. So if you think about skills-based organization, it's all about the word that's in it, skills. And I actually had a conversation with a hiring manager that was wanting to hire based on skills, and I got the requisition and there were no skills listed. Like, it's in the name, skills-based hiring, it's in the name, so we have to have skills. So it involves the ground level, like, do you have the foundation set up to be successful with skills, is understanding the skills taxonomy that is important to your organization. And that is really, I'd say, the first step. So if you're thinking about like real takeaways from Gretchen and her experience, it's having that skills taxonomy, which is a structured list of skills that are defined for your organization. I'm not suggesting go out and purchase a skills taxonomy and one size fits all, but it's really based on your organization, and it's a systematic approach that allows you to categorize and classify the skills that really matter to your business. In Leidos skills taxonomy, we created the taxonomy with standardized terms that could be used across the organization. We categorized our skills and we created definitions of those skills. And we aligned our skills to our job profiles, which is what we call our career architecture. So you can start to see we're starting to thread skills even more through our talent processes. But that skills taxonomy is a very important step, and it takes some time to do. It is not something that, like I said, there's not a one size fits all skills taxonomy.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point perspective, because you hear a lot about taxonomies today. That's another one. Taxonomies, ontologies, career architectures, a lot of like really kind of abstract concepts that have like, real application. There's a good question that came in from Melody in the chat, and I just want to make sure that we address that. She had asked, are people now posting, job role or posting role descriptions versus job descriptions? And do companies have to actually post both of those now, or is there a way to kind of, pivot to one versus the other? And Gretchen, I'm interested in your view on this.
Yeah, our requisitions are very role specific, because a job description or profile, as we call it, because we are a Workday customer, so it's called a job profile. That's our HR management system. Are more generic so that you can have many different roles that sit under that job description or job profile. So we're seeing the requisitions are very specific to the role that's being hired. So it's a great question. So we're not posting the job description per se. It's the requisition based on the role.
That's actually, yeah, that's a really good point. The role almost becomes kind of an artifact that's consumed by different vehicles, and then a job posting is one of those things. Jumping back to taxonomies, again, we hear a lot about that. And a taxonomy really is, and I don't mean to oversimplify it, but in a lot of ways, it's a flat information file. It's like it can be a text file, a CSV, it can be in a database structure. But tell me a little bit about like what makes a taxonomy real. You really have to have software to kind of deliver that. You mentioned Workday. There's certainly SAP. Talent Intelligence Hub is kind of the new product that's actually coming into the market. How do actual taxonomies get implemented and deployed? How do actually employees in the workforce and leaders actually interact with the taxonomy to kind of bring it to life?
Sure. Yeah. Workday has a product called the Skills Cloud. And the Skills Cloud, if there are any Workday customers on the line, you'll know what I'm talking about. It is really a consolidation of skills across all of Workday's customers. And so the problem with that, and not taking that as your taxonomy, is the 200,000 or so skills that are in the Skills Cloud aren't meaningful to your organization. So we took those skills and really took a subset, what's meaningful to us, and categorized them. And we have category groups and categories. So if you think about human resources, learning and development, instructional designer. So that's where you would see a category group, a subgroup, and then a skill. There could be, and many skills under instructional designer that would be relevant then to a role as an instructional designer. Where this comes to play for our employees is basically adding those skills onto their profile. And we did start this part of the exercise around skills-based organizations, as I mentioned, back in 2015. And the first step for us was to have employees identify skills and add them to their profile. We talked about the what's in it for you, so the WIFM. So what's in it for me as an employee? As Leidos is an organization where our people are a business and our people are working for our customers, for us as an organization to understand the strength of the skills of our employees, it makes for better proposals for us to win work. So the what's in it for the employee was, hey, if we know your skills, Mark, and it's on your profile, and we win more work, that's more opportunity for you. And so that's how we started with the what's in it for you. What we didn't do, and write this down if you're considering this, is to put some guardrails in place. How many skills? What skills are important? Is it every skill since you learned how to walk? We've had several, we have employees with 150 or so skills. We now say your top 12 to 15 skills. What do you want to be
Right.
known for? What are your current skills? Because I may have a skill from 12 years ago I haven't used. So you have to think about, is it relevant? Like the recency of it. That skill is probably diluted. Maybe I could pull off, but I'd probably have some effort to be able to do that skill again. We didn't provide that guidance in the beginning. So that's a key takeaway. We didn't know what we didn't know. We're like, get your skills in. And we didn't have a taxonomy. So we had employees putting in all kinds of skills. And so we had to do some significant cleanup. I'll say it was always fun to look at the skills that employees put on their profile. One was appendix. Could appendix be a skill? I'm pretty sure it's a body part. And you would think, well, maybe there's something to do with the appendix. Yellow, there's all kind of just skills. I actually had to Google, is yellow a skill? And it isn't. It's really a color. You're probably thinking, yeah, it's a color, not a skill. Mm-hmm.
Right, right. And yeah, no, I think the point that you made too, without some level of governance at an individual level, number one, at least defining and actually having a set of definitions and taxonomies that people can pick from versus a free-form field where they can actually literally just enter anything, that's actually very, very important. Then setting some guidelines that, you don't need to have the encyclopedia of everything you've ever done in your life. You just need to have your top 12. Like, to your point, what are the things you really want to be known for? What's relevant today and so forth. There's some questions on validation and quantitative versus qualitative. We'll talk about that in a few moments. But one thing I did want to bring up, and we started to talk about, so let's say that I have those 12 skills, the things I want to be known for. There's a lot of discussion today around career mobility, right? And the transition from something that was very much a hierarchical point of view in terms of career growth versus something that's more of a career lattice. Especially in the Leidos world, where you're always, quoting on new business, you're always kind of putting those skills front and center in proposals. How does actually having a current and contemporary skill profile actually promote that career mobility, that career growth for the employee?
Yeah, absolutely. Very important. And we like to be intentional around career mobility. I like to describe my own tagline: you come for the job, you stay for the career. At Leidos, I've been here 16 years. My plan was, I came in through an acquisition. I'm here for 2. I like smaller companies. I'm out of here. Here I am 16 years later because I just love the opportunities at Leidos and the people. But once you've got your skills identified on your profile, and you have skills aligned across your talent processes. So think courses. So that was an example I used earlier. You're creating the course. You can understand then what are the skills associated with it. If you're a Workday learning customer, and I'm not here doing an advertisement for Workday, but you'll hear me talking about that often. Skills are then suggested on courses that you create. And so if you have them on your courses, you have them on gigs, you have skills associated with mentors, with jobs, career paths. That's when the magic of the AI really begins, because the possibilities are endless on the suggestions. So if Mark, the skill that you have a gap in, and we're going to get to and talk about assessment and skill gaps, but if you understand the skill that you are interested in developing, then you can look at suggested courses, gigs, mentors to talk about that have that skill, and then the jobs that are available inside of the organization. And then the career pathing, where you can look at other opportunities and you can create basically a map of where you want to move within the organization. And that's when I think the possibilities really are endless, and the magic that AI does for you. And that's where you see the connection of skills, as I said earlier, that common connector between all of those talent processes.
Right, right. No, I think that really is a great call out. And ironically, as you're talking about that, when I actually go in and I meet with customers and they say, boy, we're having a real challenge around learning adoption, just getting people to take courses. the very first question I ask is, how is that learning connected with opportunity? Like if I complete that course, am I going to be able to qualify for a new job, a new assignment? And you find those two things to be directly related. So ironically, a way to boost employee engagement and learner engagement is to actually adopt a set of skill definitions, adopt skill domains, so you actually have a common currency that can actually enable an employee to kind of move and pursue their kind of career aspirations and so forth. With all that said, I actually just came off another discussion with World Economic Forum this morning on this very same topic. There's so many definitions for skills, and I've often found, and there's no shortage of taxonomies in the world. And even if you go to GPT-4 or some of the contemporary large language models, embedded within that, because it's built on the corpus of data that the internet is based on, you can actually deduce and actually gather like skill definitions and competencies from there. But many of these things are very high level and difficult to measure. And, I think some of this is coming out in the questions as well. But how does an organization like reliably measure like the attributes of proficiency of a skill such that you can actually make it consumable and the connector inside of a talent lifecycle? Like, what are some of the things that people should really look for when they're trying to assess and understand and actually define proficiency, so it's not purely just a qualitative exercise?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I know a lot of organizations are thinking about and preparing for this step, like the measurement aspect of proficiency. And from my perspective, you really have to take a step back and understand your organization's use cases. So, what is really going to be meaningful to your organization? So, are you looking at skill assessment because you want to measure from a career development perspective? You want employees to measure the gaps that they have, their skills that they have against their current role? Could it be from a career progression perspective? Do you want employees to measure their skills against a future job? Could it be you're looking at skill gaps across the entire organization because you want to design upskilling programs? So then you're really looking at kind of that macro level of skill data that you can get. Are you looking to measure skill gained through training and upskilling, where you do assessment before and an employee does assessment after? You could also be trying to measure skill proficiency in succession planning. So being very purposeful around, from a talent management perspective, which employees you want to assess against opportunities that you think they're going to be preparing for, and maybe even performance management. You could be looking at in your organization specific skills you want your employees to have, and you might be measuring against performance management. So you got to really think about what's your use case or cases. In our case, we have multiple use cases that we're looking to do skill assessment for and are actively doing now. And then you can think about the different ways you can measure. And there's a lot of research and discussion, and there'll be different perspectives and points of view on the value of self-assessment. So I believe that is a way to measure, is to have employee take an assessment, give them the definitions of what the skills are, and then you could fit that into any of those use cases I said. And then you can have a manager assess and validate, and then you could level set, across the two. My perspective is you don't have to do that aspect. We do trust that our employees are answering honestly what they believe their level of skill is when they're doing a skill assessment. There's knowledge checks that can measure the proficiency. You can have capstones that have an assessment at the end. I think about our labs, and of course, last but not least, certainly are the benchmarks and the interactive benchmarks that we use in Percipio. That allows that pre-assessment. Then you take some learning, and then whatever timing you want to have set up, whether it's 30 days or 60 days, you invite the learner back in to do the post-assessment, and then you can measure that skill gain. So I think there's multiple ways. First, you start with what is your use case or use cases, and then you work from there as to how you're going to measure and assess skills.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And you mentioned, which I think is actually very important because again, there's no shortage of assessment tools out there. I mean, there's a lot of and there's a lot of philosophies and
Mhm.
methodologies for assessment. But I think a couple facets that you described. Number one, just a basic knowledge and skill assessment. Do people actually have the knowledge and skills? And certainly at Skillsoft, we have a product we call Skill Benchmark. We've got interactive versions of that can, to a certain degree of reliability, actually get you to at least a pulse and a perspective on the skills that folks have. But I think the other thing you mentioned too is actually getting the manager assessment and validation of that, right? Because you actually like to see that come through. If people can get their network to actually validate internally that these folks have the skill, or if their actual work performance actually supports that, meaning they've been assigned to a project where they're doing that. That's another great source of certainly a level of validation as well. And then certainly in a world of AI where you can start to kind of measure and really understand these things at another level of granularity, I think is incredibly important and compelling as well. So one other point, I think I'll bring it up. It was kind of raised in the chat. So, employee says, here are my top 12 skills, right? They updated their Workday profile or their SuccessFactors profile, or maybe they're in Oracle. Maybe they've taken some training and added to that. How do you actually create kind of that pull for skills? Like if an employee, which I think this is actually the ideal state. This is great. Like if you have employees that want to do this, they want to start adding skills. I certainly have a point of view on how this could work, but I'd be interested as people say, okay, I'm making my top 12 and they want to change those out. How do they go about actually adding skills to their profile? How do they change? How do they actually mature those through their day-to-day work? And Gretchen, I'd be interested in your thoughts or perspectives how I've done
Yeah.
this in the past.
Yeah. Well, my dream would be that as you gain new skills and you learn, you're updating your profile so that it is correct and representing the skills you're bringing to the organization. I'll tell you, the reality is, and even for myself, I look at it once or twice a year. We do campaigns. We do a time of the year we call Career Month. And during Career Month, that's the time where we bring it forward and we ask everyone to look at the skills and make any updates that they've had in the prior year. As the technology has improved, you're also having opportunities where you're touching different parts to have skills suggested for you. And so if you're in Workday, for example, and you're looking at your profile, it's going to look at the skills you have and it's going to suggest to you, hey, do you have these other skills? And so the more you're in there, the more you're going to get those sorts of prompts. I expect to start seeing that increasing even more in tech as technology is used. You take a course and then you get a pop-up that says, hey, Gretchen, do you want to add this skill with this level of proficiency to your profile? And you say, well, yes, I do. And then you're able to make changes to your profile. So we have an active campaign where we remind and ask employees to do that. There are employees that do update on a regular basis, but for now, we still have that process where we go out and remind that you should be doing that.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's and if you can motivate them to get them to own that, and you have it just like open enrollment every year, well, now it's open skill like Career Week. And I've noticed in many organizations that I work with that this notion of a career month or skills month or talent month or learning month, like those are becoming more and more recurring themes that we see across many leading organizations. The thing I would add to this is I think if someone is telling you that, hey, I want to add skills to my profile, well, that's a perfect opportunity to invite them to go and learn something, right? To invite them to go and get a credential, to get a badge, and actually have that mean something inside of your environment. And again, if you need to augment an off-the-shelf skill or an off-the-shelf training with some of your own custom proprietary information, there's a perfect opportunity to blend that and actually have a digital credential that actually enables that. The other really powerful thing that it does, if someone's coming to me and they're saying, hey, I have these 12 skills, I want to swap them out. Well, that's a great opportunity. Hey, I've got this new assignment. Wouldn't it be great for you to take that on? Because this will actually build your skill profile. Now you're actually building that that motivation. And ultimately, this creates a really powerful dialogue between the employee and the leader. Now, one other point that would be interesting to get your view on, Gretchen, and I run into this sometime, in discussions with customers and even some of the conversations we have internally around product. It is one thing for someone to have the skill, but that doesn't necessarily translate to performance. And I can imagine there's a lot of really awkward discussions with executives, with leaders to say, wait a minute, all these people are saying they have these skills, and whether it's cyber or cloud or leadership or whatever, but I'm not seeing it in performance. Like, how do you parse that discussion? How do you navigate that skills doesn't necessarily apply performance? Now, I certainly have a point of view there as well, but I've been interested just in practically speaking, how do you actually distinguish between the two?
Yeah, that's an interesting, and we do not have skills as part of our performance development process at this time. My perspective is that, of course, you can have a skill and not be using it in your job, or you could have a job responsibility where you need skills and it's a gap. So I can see how that would be meaningful. I'd love to hear your perspective on that, Mark.
Yeah, I actually would say that if someone has the skills, but you're not seeing that reflective in performance, then I think the opportunity there is around leadership. And I've often reflected in saying, okay, if someone is saying they have all these great skills, but you're not seeing that translate to the job or the outcomes, then clearly the gap or the delta is there. You need your leaders to bring those skills out in people's performance. And it could be that maybe the leader has unrealistic expectations for how those skills are going to be applied, or the assignments that they've actually put them on, or they're not giving them enough support or coaching or guidance to actually execute upon that. But I would say even having that information, knowing that people believe that they have the skills, or their manager has said they have the skills, but it's not reflecting in performance, that's actually very powerful information to have, irrespective of that. So I actually wouldn't, my own personal view is I would think about those as two separate things. And I would actually invite that discord, because that discord is actually what translates to execution, right? It's one thing to have an idea. It's one thing to have people that have skills. It's another thing to have the idea and the skills come together into execution or performance. And that really is kind of the intersection of leadership. So I actually think that's actually a very powerful kind of corpus of data and information to unpack. And we could schedule an entirely other session on that piece of it. But I think that's going to be, as we move into 2025 and beyond, one of my predictions is you're going to get into people reconciling skills versus performance and really trying to understand how those two things connect. That is just the next logical kind of evolution of that. So I know we only have about 5 minutes left. We always plan these things to be like to go, and we always seem to run up against time. But maybe just a couple more questions. We've got a whole host. I think we've got about 50 people on the call right now, many of whom are getting ready, heading into 2025. They're getting ready to plan their skilling strategy, and they're probably getting ready to make their presentations to their executive teams. What are some things that someone should consider? Like if they're just trying to get a skills-based talent lifecycle up and running, how should they present that? What are some realistic milestones to set? How do they get executive buy-in, and how would they how they actually measure the ROI of that?
Yeah, good. It's a great question. So when you're putting together your plan, so you need to understand from a technology perspective where the skills taxonomy can live. So partnering very closely with your HRIS, your systems team. I have a partner in crime. I come to her with all these ideas because I'm the function, and she really helps me to implement it within the system. So understanding the capability you have in your system today, because as we started talking about, AI and the use of skills is coming into the majority of the HR and learning platforms. So you definitely want to see in what you can actually do from a system perspective so that you can house your skills taxonomy in your HR system, because that's where it's going to be useful in connecting all of your talent. You want to think about buy-in. And so who are your key stakeholders? Who is for skills-based organization already? I was recently, just in the last 3 or 4 years, getting requests from parts of the business where they wanted to create their own skills taxonomy. They wanted to do their own assessments. Some of them actually did, and they came to me. They're like, voila, Gretchen, here you go. And different parts of the business. So I knew they were going to be the champions because they understood the value to the organization of having skills assessed and to know what your skill, bench is, if you will, of your talent. Thinking about once you've identified those key stakeholders, you also want to have the executive level buy-in. And I have a couple of figures that I just want to read so that I'm reading them correctly. Fortune 500 CEOs are now seeing harnessing skills as a competitive advantage, and they've ranked talent shortages as the #1 threat to their business. So when you're going to your CEO, it's likely your executive leadership team already is thinking this, already hearing this, understanding the value of skills. Having these in your back pocket or part of your presentation, the shock and awe of the why we want to do this and what the return on investment is. It's 6 times more expensive to hire skilled people compared to retaining and building skills within the organization. 6 times more expensive. So if you know the cost to replace in your organization, you could start to really show that in a real solid return on investment number. And 40% of core skills will change in the next 5 years due to the advances in AI. And 50% of all employees will need reskilling. So understand the facts, get the latest facts that are out there, do a little research. But I'll tell you, that's what the Fortune 500 CEOs are already thinking about. And so when you come to them and suggest skills-based organization and what that return on investment is, they're probably already hearing it and thinking about it if they haven't already brought it to you.
Right. No, I think those are really great insights, Gretchen. Thank you so much. The other thing I would just call out, and we'll probably close just here with a couple of thoughts, but I think when you're thinking about skills and transitioning the skills, I wouldn't try to boil the ocean in the first year. It's more important to target a single role and think about that role from workforce planning all the way to like retire, and just thread that entire kind of process around how will the skills be consumed by all the different HR work functions that you have. And if you can get buy off for 1 or 2 or a handful of job roles across your entire HR lifecycle, you have something to build from, versus just defining the skills for 200,000 people and then hoping that you can actually start to federate that information. It's always better to start small, generate some near-term wins, get people through an entire kind of HR and onboarding cycle, and then scale from there. And I think that's really and your point about replacement and transitioning costs, like if you can promote people from within through improved career mobility by understanding and relating, connecting skills in a meaningful way, I think that this pays for itself inside of like an operating cycle. So, Gretchen, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. Mel, I'm going to turn it over to you to close us out. I know there's some questions around whether or not this session will be recorded or we'll share it. We'll follow up with that. And certainly, if you're interested in more details on how to think about skilling and skill transformation, again, feel free to visit us at skillsoft.com. We've got other case studies and other materials that we'd invite you to take a look at. So, Mel, I'll turn it over to you to close us out. And thank you all so much for taking the time to join the session today.
And thanks to both of you for a wonderful discussion. We really appreciate it here at the Learning Guild, and we appreciate you taking the time to prep and to present today. A great session to close out our 2024 season. Thanks to all of you for joining live. This session was recorded and will be posted probably within a business day or two up to the Learning Guild site. So you should be able to get that, and usually a follow-up email will come as well. So thank you all. Thank you, Gretchen. Thank you, Mark. And thanks to all of you. We hope you have a wonderful rest of the day wherever you are in the world. And we look forward to seeing you in future events. Thank you.
Thank you.